this episode, we're going to focus on a security reality that surprises many beginners. The biggest identity problems often happen before and after someone logs in, not during the login itself. You can have strong passwords, great multi-factor authentication, MFA, and modern authorization models. But if accounts are created sloppily or left active when they should be removed, you still have serious risk. Identity lifecycle control is the practice of managing accounts from the moment they are created to the moment they are disabled or deleted. That includes provisioning, which is how access is granted, deprovisioning, which is how access is removed, and privileged access management, PAM, which is how high-impact access is controlled. These topics matter because identity is not a one-time setup. It is a living system that changes as people join, move roles, take leave, and leave the organization. A well-run identity lifecycle reduces the number of forgotten accounts, reduces excessive permissions, and reduces the chances that attackers can find a neglected doorway. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at Cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Provisioning begins with a simple question: what should a new user or service identity be able to do on day one? In mature environments, provisioning is driven by defined roles and business processes rather than by ad hoc requests. If someone joins the finance team, their identity should be placed into specific groups that grant the minimum required access for finance tasks. If someone joins the help desk, their access should be different and should not include unrelated systems. The goal is to avoid building a custom permission set for each person, because that does not scale and leads to inconsistent access. A clean provisioning process also reduces human error by making common access needs predictable. For beginners, it helps to think of provisioning as issuing keys based on a job description, not based on whoever yells the loudest or whoever is most convenient to satisfy. Automation plays a huge role in safe provisioning because humans are inconsistent and busy. When accounts are created manually, mistakes happen, and those mistakes often grant too much access. Automated workflows can connect hiring systems or identity platforms to account creation, ensuring that the right groups and policies are applied from the start. Automation also makes it easier to enforce rules like requiring MFA enrollment and requiring secure device policies before access is fully granted. Another benefit is speed, because new employees can become productive without waiting days for access tickets to be processed. The security benefit is not just convenience, it is consistency. Consistency is what allows auditing and governance to function, because you can predict how access is being granted and spot exceptions that need attention. However, automation only works well when roles and access packages are well designed. If roles are bloated or poorly defined, automating them simply spreads the problem faster. This is why identity lifecycle management depends on strong authorization foundations like role-based access control, RBAC, and careful least privilege design. The organization must define what access a role truly needs, and then keep those definitions current as systems change. Without that governance, provisioning becomes a constant pile of exceptions and special cases. Beginners sometimes assume the hardest part is creating accounts, but the hardest part is deciding what those accounts should be allowed to access. Once you have that clarity, automation becomes a powerful tool rather than a risk amplifier. Now shift to deprovisioning, because this is where many organizations get into trouble. Deprovisioning is the process of removing access when a person leaves, changes roles, or no longer needs certain permissions. It sounds straightforward, but it is often messy in practice because accounts exist across many systems. A user might have access to email, cloud applications, internal file shares, development tools, and third-party services. If even one of those accounts stays active, it can become an entry point for attackers, especially if the user's credentials are later stolen or reused. Another risk is insider threat, where a departing employee might still have access for longer than necessary. Good deprovisioning is therefore about speed and completeness. When someone leaves, access should be removed quickly and across all connected systems. Role changes and temporary assignments make deprovisioning more subtle than simply disabling accounts. People move from one department to another, join a special project, or fill in for someone on leave. If access is granted temporarily and never removed, permissions accumulate, and least privilege breaks down. This is one of the main ways privilege creep happens over time. A strong lifecycle process treats access as something that expires unless it is still justified. Some environments use time-limited group memberships or periodic access reviews to force reevaluation. The key idea is that deprovisioning is not just an exit process. It is an ongoing hygiene process that keeps the access model aligned with real job needs. For beginners, think of it as regularly collecting old keys and updating key rings as people's responsibilities change. Service accounts and non-human identities also require lifecycle control, and they are often overlooked. These identities run applications, automate tasks, and connect systems together. Because they are not tied to a human who will leave the company, they can persist for years. If a service account uses a long-lived secret and that secret is exposed, an attacker can gain persistent access that is difficult to attribute to a person. Lifecycle control for service accounts includes tracking ownership, rotating secrets, limiting permissions, and disabling accounts that are no longer needed. It also includes ensuring that service accounts are not used as shared logins by humans, which is a common but risky shortcut. Beginners should remember that an identity is any entity that can request access, and every identity needs an owner and a plan for change over time. This brings us to privileged access management, because privileged identities are the sharpest tools in the environment. Privileged access includes the ability to change security settings, create or disable accounts, modify systems, access large datasets, or administer critical infrastructure. Attackers often aim for privileged access because it lets them expand control and hide their activity. PAM is a set of practices that reduce the risk of privileged accounts being abused. One practice is separating everyday accounts from administrative accounts, so users do not browse the web and read email while operating with elevated privileges. Another practice is requiring stronger authentication and stricter monitoring for privileged actions. A third practice is limiting privileged access to specific management networks or hardened devices. These practices reduce the chance that a compromised workstation becomes the pathway to full administrative control. A key PAM concept is just-in-time privilege, which means privileges are granted only when needed and for a limited time. Instead of giving someone permanent administrative rights, the system allows them to elevate for a specific task and then removes that elevation automatically. This reduces the window of opportunity for an attacker. Another related concept is just enough access, which means even when someone is elevated, they receive only the specific privileges needed for the task, not a blanket administrator role. These ideas align closely with least privilege, but they apply with extra intensity because the stakes are higher. For beginners, the practical takeaway is that privileged access should be treated like borrowing a master key, not like carrying one around all day. You want strong controls around who can borrow it, when, and for what reason. Monitoring and auditing are essential for lifecycle control and PAM because you need evidence of what happened. Provisioning events, deprovisioning events, role changes, and privilege elevations should all generate logs that can be reviewed. These logs help detect misuse, such as unusual privilege grants or repeated failed attempts to access privileged functions. Auditing also supports compliance and accountability because it creates a trail that shows why access was granted and when it was removed. Without monitoring, you may not notice that a departed employee's account is still active or that a service account is being used in unexpected ways. Lifecycle control is as much about visibility as it is about process. If you cannot see account changes, you cannot reliably secure them. There are also organizational habits that make lifecycle control succeed or fail. One habit is clear ownership, meaning each system and each identity type has someone responsible for its governance. Another habit is having a reliable source of truth for employment status and role information, so access changes are triggered by real events, not by informal emails. A third habit is periodic review, where managers and system owners confirm that access still matches job responsibilities. When these habits exist, lifecycle management becomes routine rather than chaotic. When they are missing, access becomes a tangle of exceptions and forgotten accounts. Beginners often focus on attackers, but many real breaches start with neglected basics like stale accounts and excessive privileges. A common misconception is that deprovisioning means deleting everything immediately, but organizations sometimes need to preserve data for legal or operational reasons. The security goal is not to erase all traces of a user. It is to remove their ability to authenticate and use access. Accounts can be disabled while mailboxes or files are retained under controlled ownership. Another misconception is that PAM is only needed for system administrators. In reality, many business roles have privileged access, such as finance approvals, customer data access, or the ability to change account settings. Privilege is defined by impact, not by job title. Recognizing high-impact permissions across the organization helps prevent blind spots where non-technical privilege becomes a major risk pathway. In conclusion, controlling the identity lifecycle is one of the most practical ways to reduce security risk because it prevents forgotten accounts, reduces privilege creep, and limits the power of compromised identities. Provisioning should grant consistent, role-aligned access that supports least privilege from day one. Deprovisioning should remove access quickly and completely during exits, role changes, and temporary assignments, ensuring that old permissions do not linger. Privileged access management adds special safeguards for high-impact accounts by separating roles, limiting elevation, and improving monitoring. The decision rule to remember is this: if an identity still has access when there is no clear, current business reason for it, that access should be removed or time-limited until it can be justified.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.